Now, you may remember at the start of this year, we covered a Tory paper. Well, it wasn't even a Tory paper, I believe. It was as an independent think tank who was doing an assessment on what the coastal towns and how they were going to vote in a potential upcoming general election that many people expected potentially to be even this year at that moment in time. But what did that paper propose? If you might remember, it was called the red tidal wave. Yes, because the Conservatives were going to lose almost every single coastal seat to Labour. And it was dubbed the red tidal wave. Why? Well, just look at the policies that the Tories have pursued. All these coastal towns are left behind places in desperate need of investment and levelling up funds, which they promised and then never delivered upon. Where at one point, these coastal towns were the biggest recipients of EU development funds and grants. Those are no longer available to them. You've got tons of infrastructure that just does not operate to these coastal towns anymore. Some of these coastal towns used to have trains. They don't even have train stations anymore because they were taken out. There's a desperate need for housing, jobs, investment in these places, which the Tories have promised and just not delivered on. And now, once again, the Tories are panicking. They are panicking that this red tidal wave is coming for them. And when they start to panic, as we've always said, they do not make smart decisions. They do not think smartly at all. And they start to make really dumb decisions and start to, well, panic. And oh boy, there is enough bad information out there and polls and stuff like that for them to start panicking more than enough. So it would not shock me once again if they thought that this was going to be a very bad time for them. So let's go into this and report on this again, because it's this time this comes from a Tory think tank, and well, they're panicking about what this means. So let's go down by the sea and find out what trouble the Tories are in this time. So, as always, before we do go getting into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one after link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. But of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel and all that. Like I say, there is the YouTube thank you button down below. And of course, there is the Pony Club as well. So, let's go on into this in The Guardian with the title of Where the Coast Goes, England Follows. Tories risk tidal wave if they ignore seaside towns, says think tank. Rishi Sunak must commit to levelling up England's struggling seaside towns or risk a political tidal wave at the next general election, a Conservative think tank has warned. Are they going to level up these places? No. This has been obvious going back from to Boris Johnson, that this great pillar that he had built as his central reason for electing him, that, look, if you elect me, I will level up all these left behind places. And we got the leveling up white paper saying, this is how much money you need to spend. This is what you need to do to be able to do it. Have they done any of that? No, not a thing. Because you had Rishi Sunak, remember, at the time, being the Chancellor, basically going in the first two chapters saying, we need this amount of money to be able to do and sort all these problems. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak, who is again the Chancellor at the time, goes, well, I'll tell you what, here's a pound. And you're like, no, we don't need a pound. We need significantly more than that. Of course, you know, it was significantly more than he was offering, but of course not enough for what the report was actually saying. It was but a drop in the ocean to what you really needed to do to level up the country and these places. And of course, they did not do it. So, let's continue on with this. So, in the report titled Troubled Waters, I like the name of that report, the think tank Onward shows that communities set within at least 5 kilometers of England's coast are poorer, sicker, more crime-ridden than their inland neighbors, and has called for a £500 million regeneration package. You ain't going to get that. You ain't just not going to get that money from this Conservative government whatsoever. And bear in mind, Onward is sort of the Michael Gove-backed, certainly the post-Conservative rethink that they're looking for, and ultimately would probably partake in this ultimate civil war that's going to be between Liz Truss's free market fundamentalist faction and possibly Michael Gove's backed Onward whatever. And of course, there's going to be, probably Suella Braverman with her crazy hard right faction as well. And of course, there will be factions within those factions, and it will all be an absolute glorious mess. As I've said, I am looking very much forward to it, as you know, as I've said all these years. So Eric, so these grim statistics highlighted in the report include the fact that early preventable deaths are 15% more likely in coastal areas than inland. Crime rates are 12% higher than the average, and disposable incomes are about £2,800 lower. So very, very bad statistics there indeed. So the seaside areas voted heavily for Brexit back in 2016, with 83% of these coastal seats voting leave, compared with just 66% inland. And these constituencies are also heavily backed Boris Johnson's Get Brexit Done message at the 2019 general election. And like I say, most of that was driven by the fishermen, by the fishing industry, in the belief that these seaside towns could somehow revive their poor fishing fortunes, and that if we get British fishermen fishing back, then excellent. These areas will regain their former prominence. Everything will be fine again. But they voted heavily through these lenses of nostalgia. And of course, as we always said back then, as we have continuously said, that will not happen. That will not revive the British fishing industry. It is worth less than 1% of the UK economy. And it is like if we were to go and say, look, we are going to base the entire UK economy on Harrods. That's not a smart move. That's not a smart move at all. So the report points out that these coastal areas have tended to swing convincingly behind the winning party in recent polls, and could be poised to turn against the Tories. Wherever the coast goes, England follows. For nearly 4 decades, seaside towns and cities have backed the eventual election winners, have said the author's report, Genevieve Treadwell. The Onward research exposes this growing gap between the declining coastal communities and the rest of England. And unless the government fully embraces coastal areas in its levelling up agenda, they risk a tidal wave against them at the next election. Well, levelling up didn't even deliver for the Red Wall and those communities there. So why on earth are they suddenly going to turn around and deliver for these communities on the sea, on the coast? It's not going to happen at all. You need a good government that is going to invest in all these areas and going to do something about it. And it's not just housing and infrastructure projects. It's about investment in jobs, the local economy, a ton of different things that these coastal, not just the coastal areas need, but all these areas need desperately. So Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Angela Rayner blamed the plight of the coastal areas highlighted in the report on 13 years of neglect and mismanagement by the Tories. Yep. And I just want to point out again, the EU was the only organization giving money to these poor coastal areas for development projects and all this type of stuff. And they voted out of that purely based on this lens of nostalgia of the heyday of like the British fishing industries and the fishing fleets that these towns used to sustain and support. They're not coming back. And but no one has provided a retort, a response to how we can grow these communities, reinvest in these local economies, and make them better. That's the sad fact of it, unfortunately. And they were conned. You know, there's going to be someone in the comments saying, you know, haha, they deserved it. But no, I've said this multiple times. These people did not deserve the cruelty, to be honest, that they got in response for believing in Brexit and thinking that Boris Johnson was generally going to level up the country, which turned out to be an incredibly cruel joke. So she responds, our plan to make Britain a clean energy superpower will see a clean energy jobs boom in these coastal communities and provide the building blocks for a more sustainable future, she added. She's not wrong. She's not wrong. These coastal communities, if we do really engage in, you know, in tidal, in geothermal energies, which again, mostly on the coast, and of course, offshore wind farm, that will massively help these areas and will create a good job boom for them and for those local economies. It will be the building blocks that can help these communities. That's what they need. And Labour's actually giving that to them. So Onward highlights the three underlying factors behind this coastal deprivation. The decline of the traditional industries, such as the fishing and shipbuilding, as we said, not surprising. The seasonal of the local economies, again, not surprising. And of course, the older populations in these areas. The fate of the industrial communities along with the coast mirrors those in the manufacturing-intensive towns inlanding facing pressures from privatizations and globalization, the report says. Funny how we've often said many a time that a lot of people voted for Brexit because they wanted less globalization. But as we always said, global Britain, the fact that we've signed these awful, horrible trade deals with like the Pacific Partnership with Australia and New Zealand, that was more globalism that these people did not want. Like I say, voting for Brexit and believing Johnson in levelling up has turned into a completely cruel joke for everyone who voted for those two policies, thinking that it was going to be the thing that finally would turn their town around. And I cannot blame a single voter for believing those things. I cannot blame a single voter for believing those things. And I've always said this, the blame for those does not rely at the people who voted for it. It lies at the feet of people like Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Nigel Farage, Daniel Hannan, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, all these people who backed Brexit and said, this is going to revitalize these areas. This is going to bring back all your jobs. They were conned. And it's what James O'Brien often says, compassion for the conned, not the con men. So, tourism in traditional England seaside towns and destinations has also faced a long-term decline since affordable air travel arrived in the 1980s. While these are long-standing trends, the gap between the coastal areas and the rest of England has continued to widen in recent years, with inland economies growing more rapidly since the 2008 financial crisis, and many seaside areas have struggled to attract investment over that period, and have often been left heavily reliant on seasonal tourism, which tends to be a relatively low-paid workforce. By analyzing the detailed income data, Onward has shown the stark differences that emerge even over the short distances. In Great Yarmouth on the East Coast, the average income is £23,000 a year, but just over 10k inland, it jumps over to 33,000. The average worker in Workington on the Cumbrian coast earns £25,000 a year, but less than 10k inland in Cockermouth. Strange, yeah. They earn the average is £34,000. Coastal towns have some of the worst health outcomes in the country, the report also points out, highlighted by the England's chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, in his annual report over 2 years ago. Blackpool in Lancashire, in which the report calls an extreme example of coastal health challenges, with the rate of preventable deaths from under 75-year-olds at 88% higher than the average across England. Not surprisingly, coastal neighbourhoods also tend to have more claimants of unemployment and other benefits than inland areas because of the higher rates of poor, sick, and elderly people, the report says. Other challenges include the fact that crime and antisocial behaviour tends to spike in seaside towns during the summer, the report shows, potentially overwhelming the local police force. In Brighton, for example, nearly half of neighbourhoods have crime rates above the national regional average, and in some areas around the city's Churchill shopping centre, where there are more crimes than residents in 2021. Even in coastal areas where the deprivation is less apparent, Onwards has suggested that the higher rates of the second home ownership can lead to a lack of affordable housing for local people, with knock-on effects for businesses also looking for staff. This is something else that we've really got to talk about. Second home ownership. It's something we've really got to take a look at. That should we be thinking of allowing second home ownership, or maybe putting a tax on this, so that the more homes you own, or more homes company owns, the more tax they have to pay. This will, of course, hopefully, relieve stock income, but then get those more homes back on the market. But it's a difficult thing to really think about. That idea in itself may be completely ridiculous, but we've got to think about some of these things and think about how we challenge that. So the think tank calls on the government to adopt a comprehensive package for policies to try and regenerate these coastal areas, including creating a coastal economy transformation program worth up to £500 million. Onward suggests that it could be modelled on the Biden administration Recomplete pilot in the US, which is investing in economically deprived areas and is suggesting giving local bodies powers over infrastructure, planning, and skills as part of the scheme. Again, we have seen Biden's administration do things like this continuously, which have, as I've said many times, shocked people on the left who thought Biden was going to be bad, but he's doing all this generally really good stuff. I think Keir Starmer's going to do the same, and I really do hope he does do that, because I will be incredibly happy if we get very similar things that Biden has done, as you've seen over in America. Now, of course, not everyone's 100% happy, but the Inflation Reduction Act, the Chip Protection Act, all those have been very, very good and proven to be good policies. Why can we not copy that? Why can we not copy good policies that other countries do and bring them over here? But other policies the think tank calls for also include extra funding for coastal police forces to help them cope with the summer surge in crime and, of course, the higher taxes on second homes left standing for empty for long periods. The spokesperson for the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities said, "We are spreading the opportunity and prosperity across the UK as part of our ambitious long-term levelling up programme." Well, you're not really, because it is absolutely failing since it began. Since 2012, we've invested over £229 million through these coastal communities. Bear in mind, look at what Onward's called for, of over £500 million to be able to do this. And yet that's the government saying we've only invested about £229 million, when the report has called for 500. This is the same they do every single time. Reports come out saying you need this amount of money, and the Conservatives go, "Yeah, we'll give them this amount." And it is far less than they need to actually solve these problems. It just creates sticking plasters which do not go on to solve the underlying problems that these communities are facing, and does nothing to achieve any true leveling up of these areas. So yeah, that's it. Are we surprised by this? No. Like I say, I've already reported on this back at the start of the year that this was happening, and now the Conservatives are now realizing, oh no, oh no, all these communities we said we would help and we would level up and we would help out, they haven't, and The red tidal wave is coming for Rishi and the Tories. And all this is going to create is more panic. The stuff that Onward has suggested in its report, Sunak and the government are just going to completely ignore, which will be absolute fodder for the Conservative civil war, because Onward will come out and say, look, if you had followed our advice, our guidance, we would have not have lost. You know, that's why whoever deserves to be leader. Oh, that's why our ideas need to become the future of the Conservative Party, which I think is really the direction they're going to go in. And like I say, while they're busy organising and fighting that battle, we can be getting on in Parliament for the next decade, if not more, potentially. That's how long it looks like it might last. Getting on, doing and passing some really progressive policies and stuff. You know, I continually tell people I've got a lot of hope. I really, really do. I have a lot of hope for the next coming administration and the one after that as well. There's a lot of good stuff going to come down the pipe, and I think a lot of people are going to be pleasantly surprised. Although, of course, there are always going to be those sour grapes who nothing, regardless of what Labour might do, will ever be good enough to sway them. Regardless even of the positive outcomes that some of the stuff that Labour might do might actually achieve. But hey, there you go. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.